Let me start live stream and recording and so forth. Okay.
Cool. Oh.
Good. All right. So let's get started. Welcome everyone to another session of our research seminar. And today it's my great pleasure to welcome Alberto Sonnino again. So he's like becoming a recurring guest here in our seminars. So just a quick introduction, Alberto got his PhD from UCL. He was advised by George Denissis and Jens Groth at the time. And during his PhD, he worked on all kinds of topics around scalability and privacy in distributed ledger platforms. And one of these projects, they actually spun out as a startup called Chainspace, which was then acquired by Facebook. And then fast forward a couple of years after leaving Facebook, they now created this company called Mysten Labs, who are building the Sui blockchain. And they're still actively doing research. And today, Alberto will present one of his latest works called Mysticeti. So Alberto, take it away.
Thanks. So first thing, I think I lost control of my computer since you started the recording. I cannot move the slides anymore. Oops.
No, it works.
Okay, good. It works. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, so thank you very much for the introduction. So this is actually a special project because Mysticeti is going to be the new core of the Sui blockchain. It does consensus, it does fastpath, it does most of the complicated things and the things that can go wrong within a blockchain, basically. We are currently running it out into production, but we still have many months to go. So this is actually a good time to present it for many reasons. First, if you hear it now, you won't be hearing tech of last year because it seems I would expect that this will be in production maybe next year, something like that. So it's still worthwhile to know it. And then if there are mistakes, I mean, we may want to know it sooner rather than later. So I've seen a little bit of the audience, but I still have like quick questions. So I can tailor the talk and make sure that I fit the time frame and also that I don't bore everyone with things that everybody knows or that I don't go too much into the details when they may not be appreciated, right? So the first question, I think everybody know how blockchain work. I already looked at the audience more or less, that was fine. Byzantine fault tolerance is also fine, I guess. But how about DAG-based consensus? Have you heard about those or not, roughly? Like you can try to like raise your hand or something. Okay.
I would say we want to definitely have like a little bit of DAG-based consensus.
Yeah, no, there will be, just to make sure how much assumptions. And then Narwhal and Burchard, I assume that only 3 to 4 people would know what they are at this stage. So I won't go into deeper analysis there. But I'll be open for questions anytime later. Okay, so in that case, I'll just say one thing for the introduction is that it's a quorum-based core. We don't discuss how we're going to select a bunch of nodes that are going to run the blockchain. In Sui, we do it through proof of stake. There are many other reasons and many other ways to do it. We don't really mind. At the end of the day, we have a quorum of nodes. We always assume that at least 2/3 of them are honest at all times. They do not leak their keys. They're not compromised. They follow the protocol, whatever what. And the other third can do whatever. It's malicious. It can actively work for the adversary and try to make the worst possible outcome from the system. So now let me skip a bunch of systems. So yeah, we can start here. So basically what happened is that DAG-based consensus works pretty nicely. It has a fairly high throughput. It has extreme robustness. It helps a lot for the synchronization in case there are network issues, but its latency has always been slightly higher than their linear counterparts, like more traditional hot stuff, PBFT and protocols like that, right? So those protocols, we kind of have abandoned them, at least within SUI, because they're not very high throughput, or at least you need to go to extreme length to give them high throughput, and they're very fragile. So one fault or bad network throws everything off. The performance becomes disgusting, and it's a bit of a disaster. So we've been working on the Mysticeti project for about maybe 6 to 9 months now, something like that. And we wanted to see if we can build a DAG-based consensus that has actually lower or equal latency than the linear counterparts. So the answer is actually we managed to do it, and the latency is actually lower than the linear chain. So this is the blockchain core, so the consensus core, Byzantine for tolerance, with the lowest latency that I could ever observe so far. I've seen a lot of it. So here is how it works. It builds a DAG. So if you don't know anything about DAG-based blockchains, it's not bad, actually, because you will not be confused by other DAG structures. This one is particularly simple. So it works like that. A node, let's say the first node, is going to gather a lot of transactions from various users. Eventually, it has enough transactions, or a timer runs out, and it decides that it's time to create a block. So block is just like a collection of transactions, or pointer to it. The author name of the block creator, it's one of the committee members, remember, and a round number. Round number is nothing special. If you're familiar with those protocols, every time that a node creates a block, it increments its round number. You start with 1 the first time you create a block. The next time you will put 2, then 3, and so on and so forth, right? So this is a normal block. This creation for now is similar to most blockchains that you've seen out there. But now we add 3 additional rules that will give Mysticeti a special structure. The first rule is that upon creating a block, you will add 2f+1 hash link to blocks of the previous round. So those blocks have been authored by 2f+1 different authors from the committee. So that is similar to most DAG-based consensus you may have seen as well, but still. Rule number 2, what we do is that there are some special so special tuples of authors and round numbers that are predetermined and assigned as leaders. So those are hyperparameters. Everybody knows from the beginning of time, it's very public, that node 1 will be the leader of round 1, and for instance, node 2 will be the leader of round 2. So if you're about to create a block at a given round, let's say at round 2 here, and you know that there is a leader for the previous round, you wait a bit for it so that you maximize the chance to including it into your parents through your hash link. So that's rule number 2. Rule number 3 is that all nodes operate in parallel. So you don't have every round a single node that creates a block. You actually have n, all of them, who create a block in parallel, or trying to include 2f+1 parents, if possible, linking to the leader, or getting all the transactions that they can within their block and then propagating them to all other nodes. So this is how the structure works. If you're familiar with previous DAG-based systems that we've built, like Narwhal, Tusk, Bullshark, all of those, you may remember that the structure was more complicated. There was a notion of, let's get certification, let's get counter signatures from a bunch of people about our block. Here, there is none of it. You just go ahead, optimistically you create your block, and you disseminate it. So at the end of the day, the DAG looks like this. So you see there is a bit of interleaving between the different block creators, and that's on purpose. There is 2f+1 links every time. I keep saying that because this is actually the crux of the matter that will allow you to reach consensus at the end. And everybody knows that some of these blocks are special because they're considered leader, right? Again, from the public parameters, nothing special here. In this example, L1, L4, and 7 are leaders, right? So now that we have this, what happens? Well, the main ingredient of Mysticeti is that all the messages in the system are embedded within the DAG. There is no notion of let's propagate a block and then we receive a new message that is a signature and then we send back another messages, that may be a certificate or an aggregate of signature. There is nothing like that. The only data structure and the only system operation that happen is the one we just described. So create block, propagate block, repeat round after round. So this, from the system aspect, pleases a lot our engineers. Fewer signature, so we burn less of our CPU to run the DAG. We can use our CPU to execute the transaction and do other things instead. Synchronization becomes a lot simpler because now you only synchronize the DAG. Everything goes through the DAG. You don't have to synchronize other type of messages or keep track of the resource utilization you give to other type of messages. And now, all the consensus and all the computer science operations are done by interpreting the DAG structure that you have in front of you. So this may become slightly more complicated than alternatives from a theory side, but from a practical side, it is much simpler. So here is the two DAG patterns that we will keep observing. So Mysticeti, it's all about observing the DAG and recognizing DAG patterns. Once you find specific patterns within the DAG you have received so far, you will be able to take a variety of actions. So I'll put that slide again a little bit later when it becomes, again, more relevant, but that's actually one of the key slides. The certificate pattern looks like the one in green. You have one block, L1, that has to the next lead round R2, 2f+1 blocks that link to it, and then at round 3, one block that links to 2f+1 blocks of round 2 that link to L1. So the green pattern there. That's the first thing. The second pattern is the red one, the blame. The blame is quite simple. It is just a block from the next round, so round 2, that explicitly does not link to the leader, to the specific block, so the yellow block there. So with those two, by observing those types of patterns many times in various configurations through the DAG, we'll be able to build some protocols, basically. So in fact, we built two protocols. One is a pure consensus protocol, again, by observing the patterns that I'll explain in a moment. And another one, we would add a fast finality. So we won't discuss about that one today because it may not be super relevant to the audience these days, but I'm happy to take questions about it. The fast finality will allow you to skip consensus for some types of transactions, but not all. Consensus is traditional, it will order all transactions like in normal blockchain. So the consensus part. The end goal is similar to most DAG-based consensus again, is you have a DAG, some of the blocks in the DAGs are leaders, and what you want to do is you want to output a sequence of leaders. You want to output a sequence such that every honest node in the system outputs the same sequence of leaders. So why are we focusing on those leaders and not like on all other blocks? Because it's actually very simple once you have a sequence of leaders in a DAG to sequence all the other blocks. What we simply do is that we say, well, look, if we manage to sequence leader L4, everybody agrees that it's to be committed. We can take the sub-DAG, so all the parents and ancestors of L4 that have not yet been committed in the past, and just linearize them trivially. So trivially could be either by depth first search. We could order all the transactions by gas fees, whatever deterministic ordering would actually work. So the point is, once we establish a sequence of leaders, every time we commit a leader, we can automatically commit the entire sub-DAG defined by this leader locally and with very little effort. So here is how we do it. So this DAG keeps advancing, and every validator keeps a copy in memory or storage of all the new parts of the DAG that have not been sequenced yet, and that he wants to derive an order for, right? So to do that, it will be very simple from an engineering perspective, but it may take a bit of focus to understand how it works in its depth. It's all actually a mental construct from the point of view of the validator. Because again, only the blocks are actual messages that are created and sent through the network. Now, all the rest is interpreting the DAG. So this is a local process that runs in an isolated fashion within each validator that is just looking at a snapshot of its memory and outputting a sequence of committed leaders. So how do we do that? The first step is we mentally organize our DAG into waves. So upon observing the following DAG that you see here on the screen, the validator would say, okay, well, round 1, 2, 3 is wave 1, 3, 4, 4, 5, 6 is wave 2, and so on and so forth. So waves of 3 rounds each. So now that we have the wave, again, mentally in our head, we're going to give a name to every round of the wave. The first is called propose, the second is called vote, and the third is called certify. And this pattern repeats. Now, the global parameter will tell us that every propose round, the beginning of every wave, will have a leader, and it will tell us which one. This is not very complicated. If you've seen how those things are implemented, basically you can have whatever public seed that has been either agreed or imposed to the whole committee, and in a round robin fashion, you derive who is going to be the leader of the first round, the fourth round, the seventh round, and so on and so forth. This is again all local, given the public seed that is available to everyone. So now we have mentally marked our leaders on the DAG that we have in memory, and we have one per wave. Now what do we do? And this is now where Mysticeti starts becoming different from the DAG-based consensus you may have learned, and also why Mysticeti reduces the latency so much with respect to previous work. So what we do is that, again, we mentally derive a second wave shifted by 1. So a second wave pattern. So we now pretend that we all start at round 2 rather than round 1. And we, again, assign in our head, propose, vote, certify as a pattern for round 2, 3, and 4, rather than 1, 2, and 3. And now for the first round of the wave, now the blue wave, we are going to reassign new leaders. So now we get the blue leaders as well. So before, we only had one leader every 3 rounds. It means that we would have to wait 3 rounds, actually, in order to commit a leader and finally output the commit sequence made of all the transactions of this subDAG. Throughput is fine. There's no problem with that. But with respect to latency, you need to wait the creation of 3 DAG rounds. So now we have 2 waves. So it is much better. If we can commit 1 leader per round, it's going to get much faster in terms of latency. And so indeed, we had a 3rd wave as well. So now we repeat the process. We now label new types of leaders at the beginning of new virtual waves in our head again. And so now every round has its own leader. This is a full pipelining, but I mean, the term pipelining may not be entirely correct here. That is ingredient 1. But now we do a second thing. Again, from the public parameters, what we will do is that we will derive ranks for the leaders so that we can have more than 1 leader per round. So before we would have said, well, L1A is the leader of round 1. Now we're going to say L1A is the highest ranked leader of round 1. But L1B is the second highest ranked leader of round 1, and so on and so forth. So here in this example, we have as many leaders per round as we have validators. It makes the example simpler, you will see later, but it's not how we would like to run it in production. I'll tell you why at the end, because it will become much more obvious. Basically, we will have 2 or 3 leaders per round, not 100, basically, not n. So, okay, now we have all of these leaders in this example, and we need to order them all. How do we do that? So again, now we can start observing those patterns. We're going to take every leader that we have, starting from the highest, and check specific patterns, if there is certification patterns, or if there are blame patterns, so that we can decide whether we should skip a leader or commit it. And so here is how it works. So we will have 2 main rules to help us. The first, the one that we expect to use all the time in case there are no attacks. So the network is good, there are no Byzantine actors that try to attack the network and things like that. It is called the direct decision rule. So every time that we will have a new DAG snapshot, we will start from the highest round. And for every leader that we have, we will ask ourselves, do we have 12+1 blames? If it is the case, we are going to label that leader as a skip. So in this little example you see, we are asking the question about L4B as an example. And do we have 12+1 blame? Remember the patterns of before. A blame is simply a block of the next round that does not link to the target block that we're trying to evaluate. In that case, yes, we have 12+1 blames. And so we can tag that block as skip. Red will be skipped throughout the whole presentation. Then another pattern will be, can we label it as commit? So commit is if we have 2f+1 of the certificate pattern. So here you can see that we have 2f+1 votes for L4D at round 5 and 2f+1 certificates for L4D at round 6. So in that case, we would label L4D as commit. So these should always be possible if the network is good and in good conditions, right? And this means that we can commit fairly fast. But now what happens if we cannot find any of those 2 patterns? We have an undecided pattern, basically. So for instance, like this, we have 1 blame, so not 12+1, not enough to label as skip, and we don't have enough certificates in order to even label L2B as a commit. So it remains undecided. Well, in this case, we say that the direct decision rule fails, and we're going to go through a backup rule. And the backup rule is called the indirect decision rule, right? Yeah. And the goal of the indirect decision rule is to label all the undecided that we couldn't decide before to either commit or skip. So this rule may look a little bit more complicated, but I'll give a brief overview that is not meant for you to understand immediately, because then I'll go through an example of the rule, and then it should become much clearer. So the direct decision rule works in 2 steps. The first step is finding an anchor. So if you are trying to determine the status of L1D in the figure there, what do? You find an anchor. So an anchor is the first block, so the highest ranked leader, with a round number that is outside of your wave. So L1D is at round 1. We need to find a block at round 4 with the highest rank that is either labeled as commit or undecided. So in this case, L4A would have been a good candidate, but it's skipped, so it cannot be an anchor. Skipped block cannot be anchored. And then it's L4B. That is step 1. Now, if we end up having L4B as being undecided, we would stop here and there would be nothing we could do. But since in this example it is labeled as commit, we can go to step 2. Step 2 is again the same thing, very similar to before. We look for a certificate pattern, remember, 2f+1 votes from the next round, and then 1 block that links to the f+1 votes to the round after. So the block with the green tick there. And we make sure that there is a link, a hash link, between the anchor and such certificate. We call it a certified link from the anchor to the block. If there is such link, we can label immediately L1D as commit. If there is not, we label as skip. So these may seem quite vague, but we can now go through an example. So the example is this. We are a validator, and we just observe our memory, and we realize that we have around 1 through 6.Ts uncommitted. So this should happen quite rarely. It means that the validator has basically been sleeping for 6 rounds, because evaluating these rules are cheap. So they should be done every time you receive a new block, or almost every time you receive a new block. But still, in this example, we just recover from, I don't know, network loss, something like that, and we received like very fast or a bulk of 6 rounds. So what do we do? First thing is, we can realize that the last two, R5 and R6, are uncompleted waves, right? So you can see R5 is the proposed round of the blue wave, while R6 is the proposed round of the pink wave. So those two, we cannot really do anything about those rounds at this stage. We cannot commit them, at least. So we're going to start from R4. So what do? We take the highest round that has a complete wave, round 4, and we start with the lowest ranked leader, so D, the very, very last of the possible leaders that we have. And we start by applying the direct decision rule. So remember, direct decision rule, we will be looking for the patterns blame and certify. In this case, what happens? We have 12 plus 1 certificates. So it's enough to immediately label L4D as commit. So we do so. Then we're happy with L4D, and we can go and move to L4C, the next block starting from the highest round, lowest rank. And we ask ourselves the same question. Does the direct decision rule allow us to directly mark it as commit or skip? And it's the same. So L4C can also be marked directly as commit. L4B is the same thing, nothing special here, but L4A is a bit different. So you can see that we have the direct skip pattern here. We have 12 plus 1 blames for L4A, no way to commit it. In fact, no one ever linked to L4A. Something strange must have happened. Either the author of that block did not disseminate it fast enough, or it did not disseminate it at all, or the block was partially lost throughout some propagations and then recovered somehow. So it's fine. The direct decision rules still allow us to make a quicker decision here. So now we continue and we progress downward. So L3D now, same rule, direct decision rule. These are quick examples, direct commit, this one direct commit, and this one direct commit. So I'm going fast through the examples that are easy so that we can go to the lowest round that are more complicated because they require the direct decision rule to take over. So now we have a lot of blocks labeled as to commit and only one labeled as to skip. L2D is also the same, and now L2C is special. So L2C, we cannot label it neither as skip nor as commit using the direct decision rule. So we only have one blame, so not enough. We need 12 plus 1 in order to label as skip. And we don't have even a single certificate. We would have needed 12 plus 1 of those to label as commit. So what do? We need to try and apply the indirect rule. So step 1 of the indirect rule is to find an anchor. And the anchor, remember, look at its wave. So L2C is in the blue wave. What's the round right after such wave is round 5. And now we look for the highest ranked leader, L5A in that case. And L5A is undecided. So it means that, unfortunately, this is a very particular example where we were quite unlucky, and L2C needs to remain undecided. You will see later what it means. But when the indirect decision rule cannot immediately apply either a commit or a skip note to your block, it means that it will impact performance. Right? It should not happen in normal circumstances. And again, it takes quite some unlucky circumstances for it to happen. Here we have L5A to be undecided and L2C that was as well. So now L2B has the same problem. Not enough certificates to commit it through the direct decision rule, and not enough blames to skip it through the direct decision rule. Again, we apply the indirect decision rule, and we look for its anchor. Its anchor is exactly the same as before. So you will realize that every block of a round has the same anchor. So again, there is nothing we can do here. We will leave L2B as undecided for the moment and just continue to make progress. L2A is simple. We can directly label it as commit because there are 12+1 certificates in the patterns that can allow us to mark it as commit. L1D now is the interesting example. So there is one certificate. So not enough for the direct decision rule to go and label it as commit immediately. And there are no blames, so we cannot skip it for sure. So what do we do? Again, in direct decision rule, we look for an anchor. So which round should the anchor be? Round 4, the round right after the wave. We start with the highest ranked block, L4A, but it is skipped. And the rule says an anchor cannot be skipped. So we go to the next leader, L4B. So this is our anchor. So we found the anchor. Now, the anchor is commit, and we can check if there is a certified link between the anchor and L1D. And in this case, there is one. So again, we need to go back into our DAG and observe the pattern of a certificate for L1D in such a way that it is linked to the anchor. In this case, we have it, and so we can label L1D as commit. L1C is exactly the same thing. Same anchor, and then similar certified link. It's different path on the DAG, again, but it's the same pattern. The pattern is the only thing that matters. The specific path don't really matter in any of those scenarios. And then L1B. This is the last possible example that we may encounter. So what happens? The direct decision rule fails because we do not have enough blames in order to directly skip it. And we do not have enough certificate to directly commit it. So again, in direct decision rule, we need to go and find our anchor. Same process before, L4A skipped, so L4B becomes our anchor. But this time is different than before because there is no certified link from the anchor to L1B. So what does it mean? It means we can mark L1B as skip instead of putting it as commit. And L1A is simple. We can directly commit it because we see enough certificate patterns. So this is what we get at the end. So this may have looked complicated the first time you hear it, but it's actually a very efficient process to run. It runs locally. You only run it over the delta of the part of the sub-DAG that you have not processed yet. So if you are up to date, you only need to do one or a couple of blocks every time you call the function. And it does not require access to networking. If we implement it right, it should have little to no access to storage. So it can be really, really fast. So we have this. How do we derive a commit sequence out of it? So this is actually a very simple process. We take all the blocks that we have, all the leaders that we have, and we order them lowest round first, highest rank. So L1A, L1B, L1C, and so on and so forth. That's step one. Now we cut the sequence as soon as we encounter the first undecided block. So L2B in this case. Again, it's an unfortunate example because we have a very early stage undecided leader. And so we have to stop the commit sequence now rather than going ahead and potentially be able to commit all the way up to L4D. But it's a special example as well. And then what do we do? Last step, every leader that has been marked red, to skip. We just forget about it. And that is it. This is our final sequence. L1A, L1C, L1D, and L2A are the leaders that we output. And so all the transactions that they reference to are immediately committed. So we can execute them, we can report to the clients that they were successful, etc. So this is the commit sequence. So I'll probably stop here for questions instead of going for the fast path Mysticeti there, and just jump here. And I have a few extra slides that I can continue on depending on how questions goes, or if you want to hear anything special. I see we have like 20 minutes.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Alberto. Yeah, let me